If this video showed up for you, it's because this story is going to move you and give you chills. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of story, and comment which city you're watching from. The heavy steel doors of the transport van groaned open, letting in the blinding midday sun and the scent of dry pine needles. Inside the reinforced cage, two amber eyes glowed in the darkness, burning with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated rage. A low, grumbling growl vibrated against the metal walls, a sound so deep it could be felt in your chest before it was heard. This was Rex. Once, he'd been a decorated canine officer, a hero wrapped in black and tanned fur. Now, the paperwork on the clipboard outside his cage described him differently. Unstable, highly aggressive, level 5 threat. The world saw a monster, but inside that cage was a soul shattered by the deafening noise of a grenade and the smell of his handler's blood. And as the handlers reached for the catchpole, Rex bared his teeth, preparing for war. But he had no idea that this was his very last chance before the needle. The transition to the rehabilitation ranch had been anything but smooth. Located in a secluded valley, the facility was known as the last stop for dogs that the police force couldn't control but refused to kill out of respect for their service. It was a place of calm winds and open spaces, but to Rex, it was just another prison. His trauma wasn't just a memory, it was a physical weight. Every time a car door slammed, he was back in that warehouse. Every time a man in a uniform approached, he smelled the gunpowder. The lead trainer, a burly man named Mark, wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched Rex hurl himself against the chain-link fence, snapping at the air. "He's broken, Mark," one of the junior handlers said, nursing a hand that had come too close to the bars. "Look at his eyes. There's no dog left in there, just instinct and panic." Mark sighed, looking at the animal who was currently pacing in tight, frantic circles. He had rehabilitated dozens of dogs, fighters, biters, terrified strays, but Rex was different. Rex was a weapon that had malfunctioned, and a malfunction in a weapon usually meant it had to be decommissioned. Mark tightened his grip on the leash in his hand, feeling a heavy sadness settle in his gut. He wanted to save him, he truly did, but he didn't know that the clock was ticking faster than he realized. Days turned into weeks, and the progress was non-existent. In fact, Rex seemed to be getting worse. The solitude of the ranch, meant to heal, only seemed to amplify the voices in the dog's head. Attempts to socialize him with other dogs ended in near bloodshed. Attempts to hand-feed him ended with handlers scrambling over fences to escape his jaws. The consensus among the staff was growing darker by the day. The emails from headquarters were becoming impatient. They wanted a status report, and unapproachable wasn't the answer they were looking for. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Mark sat on the porch of the main cabin, head in his hands. He had spent an hour trying to get Rex to accept the simple sit command, only to be met with a lunging attack that had tested the strength of the bite suit. He was tired and was ready to type the email recommending euthanasia. It was the merciful thing to do, he told himself. A dog living in that much fear wasn't really living. While Mark wrestled with the life and death decision, the screen door creaked open. A small figure in denim overalls and pink sneakers stepped out. It was Lily, Mark's 6-year-old daughter. She held a tattered stuffed rabbit by the ear and had a smudge of strawberry jam on her cheek. She looked at her father, sensing his distress, but her eyes drifted past him toward the high-security enclosure at the edge of the yard where the monster lived. "He's lonely, Daddy," she said, her voice small and matter-of-fact. Mark looked up, startled. "Lily, stay away from there. You know the rules. That dog is sick. He's very dangerous." "He's not sick," she insisted, hugging her rabbit. "He's sad. He cries at night." Mark rubbed his eyes. "Dogs whine, honey. It's not crying. Go back inside and wash your face." He watched her turn back, but the moment he looked down at his paperwork, Lily didn't go inside. She slipped around the side of the house, drawn by curiosity that was stronger than fear. She had to see the sad dog, But she had no clue she was walking straight into the territory of a creature everyone was afraid to touch. Rex was lying in the dirt, panting, the heat radiating off his black fur. His ears twitched. He heard the crunch of small footsteps on the gravel. His muscles coiled instantly, a threat, an intruder. He stood up, a low growl beginning in his throat, his hackles rising like a jagged ridge along his spine. He moved toward the fence, ready to strike, ready to defend his perimeter. Lily stopped 3 feet from the chain-link fence. She didn't flinch at the growl. She didn't back away when Rex slammed his front paws against the fence, barking with a ferocity that would have sent a grown man running. She just stood there, tilting her head. "You're very loud," she whispered. Rex paused. The shouting usually followed the barking. The men usually yelled, "No," or "down." But this voice was different. It was like the sound of the wind in the trees, soft, non-threatening. He barked again, but with less conviction. He waited for the aggression, for the challenge. It didn't come. Lily took a step closer. "I brought you something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of dried beef jerky that she had swiped from the kitchen counter. From the porch, Mark stood up to stretch and froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He saw Lily. He saw her hand extending toward the mesh. He saw Rex's muzzle inches from her fingers. "Lily, no!" he screamed, sprinting off the porch. But he was too far away.
Rex stared at the small hand. He could smell the salt of the meat, but more than that, he smelled her. She smelled like milk and grass and peace. There was no adrenaline spiking in her blood, no scent of fear for him to react to. His brain, wired for combat, hit a wall. He didn't know how to fight something that wasn't fighting him. The red haze of trauma that usually clouded his vision began to thin. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the snarl faded from his lips. He sniffed. Lily pushed the jerky through the link. "It's okay, puppy," she cooed. Rex took the treat. He didn't snatch it, he took it gently, his wet nose brushing against her small fingers. Mark skidded to a halt 10 feet away, his chest heaving, prepared to tackle a beast, but he stopped dead. He watched, breathless, as the dog that had tried to tear his arm off an hour ago sat down. Rex sat down not because he was told to, but because he wanted to be on her level. He let out a long, shuddering breath, and for the first time in months, his tail gave a single, tentative wag. It was a small movement, but it shattered the world Mark thought he knew. "He likes the beef, Daddy," Lily said, turning to smile at her terrified father. "See, he's a good boy." That moment changed everything, but the road ahead was still paved with glass. Over the next few weeks, a secret routine developed. Under Mark's extremely close and anxious supervision, Lily became the bridge. She was the only one allowed near the inner fence. She would sit cross-legged in the dirt, reading her storybooks aloud. Rex would lie on the other side, pressing his body against the wire, listening to the rhythm of her voice. It was as if her innocence acted as a frequency jammer for his PTSD. When she was there, the flashbacks stopped. The noises of the world became bearable. Mark watched the transformation with a mix of awe and dread. He saw the dog Rex used to be emerging from the shell. He saw the intelligence, the loyalty, the desperate need to serve and protect, but he also knew the calendar was against them. The rehabilitation board was scheduled to arrive in 2 days for the final evaluation. These weren't dog lovers. They were liability assessors. They needed to see a dog that could follow commands from a handler, not just a dog that liked a little girl. The morning of the evaluation was gray and overcast. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity. A black SUV crunched up the driveway, and 3 men in suits stepped out. They carried thick binders and grim expressions. They didn't look at the mountains. They looked at the fences, checking for security breaches. "Is this the animal?" the lead evaluator asked, pointing at Rex, who was pacing nervously. Rex could smell the sterile scent of the strangers, the smell of judgment. His ears pinned back. "This is Rex," Mark said, stepping between the men and the cage. "He's made significant progress." "We'll see," the man said, clicking a pen. "Release him into the assessment yard, muzzled, of course." Mark's heart sank. The muzzle was a trigger. It reminded Rex of the transport, of the restraints. "He does better without." "Protocol, Mark," the evaluator cut him off. "If he can't handle a muzzle, he can't be rehomed. Do it." The next hour was a disaster. Rex fought the muzzle. He refused commands. When the evaluator raised a clipboard to make a note, Rex interpreted the movement as a threat and lunged, the leather straps of the muzzle straining as he tried to bite. "Aggressive response to neutral stimulus," the evaluator muttered, writing it down. "Failure to comply. Unpredictable." Lily was watching from the window of the house, her hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. She could feel Rex's panic. She knew he was scared, not mean. But the men in the suits didn't speak the language of the heart. They spoke the language of risk management. "I think we've seen enough," the lead evaluator said, closing his binder with a sound like a gavel striking a desk. "He's a ticking bomb, Mark. I'm sorry, but we can't sign off on this. You have until the end of the week to schedule the procedure." The word procedure hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Mark felt sick. He looked at Rex, who was now lying in the dirt, exhausted and defeated, staring toward the house, looking for the only person who had ever understood him. As the evaluators turned to head back to their car, discussing lunch plans as if they hadn't just sentenced a hero to death, a loud, splintering crash echoed from the stables behind the main house. It was the sound of wood shattering. Mark spun around. The ranch's prize stallion, a massive, temperamental beast named Titan, had kicked through his stall door. The horse was spooked, eyes rolling white, 1,200 pounds of panicked muscle charging into the open yard. And right in the stallion's path, having slipped out the back door to say goodbye to her dog, stood Lily. The men in the suits froze. Mark screamed, his legs feeling like lead. The horse reared up, hoofs slashing the air, a terrified scream escaping its throat. Lily was too small, too slow. She covered her head, bracing for the impact. But she had forgotten one thing. She wasn't alone. Inside the assessment yard, Rex heard the scream. It wasn't the scream of a soldier. It was the scream of his girl. The muzzle was still on his face, but the latch on the assessment yard gate hadn't been fully secured by the distracted evaluator. Rex didn't think. He didn't remember the trauma. He didn't care about the men in suits. He launched himself at the gate with the force of a cannonball. The metal latch gave way with a screech. The black and tan blur shot across the yard. He was moving faster than he had ever had in his line of duty. He wasn't a broken dog anymore. He was a missile.
Just as Titan's iron-shod hooves descended like sledgehammers, Rex collided with the stallion's chest. The impact was sickening. A dull thud of bone meeting muscle. The massive horse stumbled, thrown off balance by the sheer velocity of the 80-pound dog. Rex hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust, but he was up in a microsecond. He ignored the pain radiating through his ribs. He ignored the muzzle that kept his jaws clamped shut. He couldn't bite. He couldn't latch on, but he could still be a wall. Titan shrieked, confused by this black demon that had appeared out of nowhere. The horse spun, lashing out with a hind leg. The hoof grazed Rex's shoulder, sending him skidding across the gravel. "Rex!" Lily screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. That voice was his fuel. Rex scrambled for traction, his claws digging into the earth. He didn't retreat. He threw himself between the girl and the beast, planting his feet wide, letting out a muffled, guttural roar through the leather straps of the muzzle. It was a sound of pure, ancient warning. You do not pass me. Titan reared again, eyes wide with panic, but the ferocity of the dog held him at bay. The horse hesitated. That split second of hesitation was all that was needed. Mark was there. He scoops Lily up in his arms, sprinting back toward the safety of the porch, his lungs burning. Rex saw the move. He saw his girl was safe, but he didn't break his line. He stood his ground, a lone warrior against a giant, snapping at the air, forcing the horse to back down, further and further away. Only when the ranch hands arrived with ropes to corral the spooked stallion did Rex finally stop. The adrenaline crashed. The world tilted. Rex wobbled, his legs suddenly feeling like water. He sank to the ground, his chest heaving, the dust settling around his black fur. Silence descended on the ranch. It was a heavy, stunned silence. The three evaluators stood by their SUV, their mouths slightly open. The lead evaluator was gripping his clipboard so hard his knuckles were white. They had just watched the uncontrollable monster throw himself into the path of a 1,200-pound animal to save a child. They had watched him take a blow that would have killed the lesser dog. Mark put Lily down on the porch and ran to Rex. He fell to his knees in the dirt, his hands shaking as he reached for the buckles of the muzzle. "Easy, boy, easy," Mark whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He unbuckled the straps and pulled the muzzle free. Rex didn't bite. He didn't snap. He simply let out a long, weary sigh and licked the salt and tears from Mark's hand. He wasn't a killer. He was a savior who had just finished his shift. Lily ran off the porch, ignoring her father's weak protest. She threw her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his dusty fur. "You saved me! You saved me, Rex!" Rex rested his heavy head on her small shoulder, closing his eyes. For the first time since the explosion that had ruined his life, the noise in his head was gone. There was no gunfire, no screaming, just the heartbeat of the little girl he loved. The lead evaluator walked over, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at the scene. He looked at the dog, battered and bruised, holding the girl as if she was the only thing that mattered in the universe. Slowly, he opened his binder. He took the red-stamped euthanasia order he had prepared earlier. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a decisive rip, he tore the paper in half, and then in half again. "Mark," the evaluator said, his voice thick. Mark looked up, defensive, ready to fight. "Change the status on the paperwork," the man said, clearing his throat. "Classification? Service dog. Retired. Handler?" He gestured to the little girl hugging the dog. "Handler? Lily." Mark exhaled, a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 6 months later, the winter snow had blanketed the ranch in white silence. Inside the main house, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow across the living room rug. Lily was asleep on the sofa, a book resting on her chest. And there, stretched out on the rug beside her, was Rex. His coat was shiny and thick. The scars were still there, hidden under the fur, just as the memories were still there, hidden in his mind. But they didn't hurt anymore. He lifted his head as a log shifted in the fire. He looked at Lily, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. He let out a soft puff of air, laid his head back down on his paws, and closed his eyes. They called him a broken weapon. They called him a beast. But as he drifted into a dreamless sleep, Rex knew the truth. He wasn't a weapon of war anymore. He was just a dog, and he was home. Sometimes the things we think are broken just need a reason to hold themselves together. And sometimes saving someone else is the only way to finally save yourself.